Hi, in this video we are going to see how the new operator in JavaScript works under the hood. What happens when you call constructor function with the new keyword? Here we have a constructor function to create user instances. When we call new user with arguments John Doe and password, what is happening behind the scenes? We all know functions in JavaScript are objects. And this object part of function has a property called prototype. For our user constructor function, that object associated with it will look something like this. You can see there is a prototype property which contains a property called constructor, and there's one dunder proto property. You can say, yeah, it's there, but how is it useful, right? The new operator does four things when you call it with a constructor function. First, it will create a plain empty JavaScript object. That is the old simple JavaScript object that we know. After creating this object, it will set its dunder proto property to point to the constructor function's prototype object. This step allows any instance of user to access that shared store of properties on user.prototype object. When we call, say, user.email, it will first look for email property on user object, but there is no email property on user object. So it should fail, right? Or we should run into some error. But usually that won't happen. This is where dunder proto link is very useful. When JavaScript fails to find email property on user object, it will not stop there. JavaScript will check whether the object that dunder proto points to does contain email property or not. So in our case here it does, and this will successfully resolve the call. This is the significance of dunder proto link. This is basically where the JavaScript's prototypical inheritance kicks in. So it will check across that prototype chain. So anywhere along the chain, if it finds that property, it will resolve that property and will execute successfully. So you can see that new created a plain empty JavaScript object for us. It also did the references for us. But new also ensures that this context inside the constructor function is now pointing to this newly created object that new had given to us. This allows constructor to add properties like, say, whatever properties we were using in our constructor function, say for example username in our case or password in our case. So we can add those properties because new has set that this context appropriately here. And finally, if the function is not returning anything, in a sense that function can return values, but what happens is if you are not returning any object from your function, the new operator will return whatever the object it has created to the outside context, which will be user in our case. Say for example, if you were to return something like, say, int 10 or say null inside our constructor function, new will actually override that process. So you will see that the null or int 10 that you return, you will never get to that value. So this is how the new operator works under the hood. Now, since we know how new works, we can create functions that actually mimic the behavior of new. We'll see that in the next video. Thank you.